We'd like to start today by acknowledging that we're on the unceded sovereign lands of the Gadigal people and pay our respects to elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey, welcome to So You're Disabled.
This episode is brought to you by Spoonie, the social network for neurodivergent, chronically ill, and disabled people. And hey, I'm Soph, I'm disabled, and my pronouns are she, they.
I'm Tam. I'm living with a disability, and my pronouns are she, her. So, as you may have seen, we've recently done something new, and we now have a submission portal where you can send us anything about your day or your lived experience or something you'd like to share. And we might even feature it on our podcast. So, welcome to our very first episode, where for the very first time, we're going to be sharing a couple of recent submissions we received. So, we actually received a submission from an anonymous person, and they said, "How do you survive as a disabled person when you can't work while waiting for SSDI and SDI decisions? I'm currently in the appeal process, and am lucky enough to have people who care about me that allow me to live rent-free. But what do we do if we don't have that support system? There are no programs to help disabled people with no income, in my area at least, and no doctors want to go through the effort of writing a letter or filling out paperwork."
Yeah, so I guess we decided to share this one because, first of all, it highlights a lot of the same issues or similar issues that disabled people and people living with disability experience. What do you do in this situation? The second thing that Tamara and I have sort of spoken about is we can speak from our lived experience of being in similar situations, but obviously this advice is just going to be based on our lived experience. We don't have all the answers, and unfortunately, it's these power structures that can, make the changes that we need to see in order to be better supported or supported at all, really, in situations like this. So, it's something Tamara's been worried about, like, especially, how do we respond? And with such a loving heart, she wants to solve the world's problems. But we're going to do our bit here to share, our thoughts on this based on our lived experience, and also to bring attention to this issue in the community that we have, because it really is an issue that I think is quite a common one for people in our community.
Thank you so much for reaching out to us. I actually, as Soph said, I have been worried about it, but also when I read this submission, I was just so sad. And it's because it really reminds me of what I said in our What Do You Do episode, when I said that, what do you do if you've been categorized as not being disabled or deficient enough? So you haven't been eligible for any support, or you're too unwell to go through the extremely long and draining process of trying to access that support, because it's just not built, in a sustainable way for disabled people. And how I said that there is no alternative, and that should be frightening. And that's what I meant, because there just isn't an alternative, and it's just so horrific. And that's why I've been so worried. I've been like, oh my God, what are we supposed to say? How are we supposed to help? It's just awful.
Yeah, it's an awful situation to be in, situations where we have no support, and it's assumed that you have someone to let you live rent-free. It's assumed you have someone to pay your way while you wait for this decision. And for our Australian listeners, by the way, we're talking about a similar system to waiting for the outcome of a DSP application, a disability support pension application. And so, it's something that is across the world, obviously, an issue that's not just for us here in Australia, not just for people over in the US. It is a global issue of what are you supposed to do while you wait for them to assess not just your disability, but how impacted you are by that disability?
Oh,
How disabled are you, and are you allowed to access support? But while you wait for it, you have no support.
it's just awful. Like, no wonder there's so much homelessness amongst our community.
Yeah.
It,
I mean, the systemic issues it feeds into are countless.
it's terrible. But then as well, right, you know, with everything that we spoke about and in the message about the doctor and paperwork, like I can speak from my own experience when I was trying to apply to get support. I was really anxious about going to the doctor to get my paperwork filled out. And it's because I've had such bad experiences. I remember I literally had one doctor once tell me that he wasn't going to fill out anything because I wasn't his patient from when I first started developing symptoms. But it's like, well, I had to leave my previous doctor because I had all of this trauma. So what am I supposed to do now? And it was just such a challenging time because then, as well as doctors not wanting to fill out the paperwork, we're subjected to so much medical gaslighting, to doctors minimizing or completely dismissing our symptoms, and then all the trauma that we have to go through with that.
Yeah. I think to come back to the question, though, um, based on lived experience, what I can say from being in a similar situation um, is I did this thing where I said to myself, okay, this isn't going to be what it's like forever, right? Like waiting for this decision to come, waiting for a change. Like in the end, regardless of the outcome, it's not going to be like this forever. And one of those outcomes is really terrifying, and I don't know what I'll do in that situation, but there's the possibility of something good coming, and I had to hold on to that hope. I know that that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I literally just all I can do is speak from lived experience, and that helped me mentally to get through that time because I just needed some sort of hope to hold on to. I think the other thing is, um, in an Australian context, what we'd maybe suggest is reaching out to your local member, a politician who works in your local area. I'm not really familiar with the system in the US, but if you have some sort of similar system, maybe you want to do that and see if they can help um, connect you in with support services or inquire about the progress of your applications. And, really ultimately at the end of the day, what we also want to do is bring awareness to this issue and the fact that things need to change. We need to stop being devalued by this capitalist system that says you have to work and you have to have accumulated wealth in order to survive. No, our system needs to support people who need it, and that includes people who can't work.
Absolutely. Uh, but going back to what I was saying about the medical gaslighting with my lived experience, when I was applying for the SSDI equivalent here, so DSP, I was just honestly, I mean, I did eventually find a doctor that helped me fill out like the bare minimum amount of paperwork that I needed to apply. But throughout that entire process, which was so long, like I had to wait so many months. And like you, I was very fortunate to have support. So I was able to live rent free as well. But even then, it came with so many mental health struggles. Like I felt like I was a burden on everyone, and I was just extremely anxious whilst waiting for this decision. So ultimately, the only thing that I could do in that time was try to focus on relaxation and just sort of challenging my negative thoughts because that's really all that I had control over. Like it's just a sad reality, but that's the truth. So I remember I know it sounded a bit silly to me at the time, but I used to sort of look at myself in the mirror and repeat nice things. So, like affirmations. So, things like, I am worthy regardless of the outcome. So, like things like that. And especially for me, a big thing was having made the step to apply because there is so much stigma associated with applying to these systems. Like everywhere that we look, it's so negatively seen. You're sort of seen as like, oh, like you're so lazy, like just get up and get a job. So a way for me to try and challenge that was to look in the mirror and tell myself that I'm really proud of myself for applying to this process, and that it's the system that's fucked and I'm not fucked. And I remember I couldn't exercise at the time, but what helped was doing some like light stretching. That was really helpful. And this as well, I have this, I still do this now. I have this page on my iPhone where I write, like on my notepad on my phone, where I write like all of my negative thoughts as they come up. And that really helps too, because it's kind of like a release. And I honestly, I would just let myself cry when I could, because that as well, it's a release of emotion. And yeah, like that's what I found helpful, because like honestly, like the reality is it really, really sucked. It really sucked at that time. The process is so inhumane. The other thing I can think of is maybe, not sure how helpful this is, but applying or like joining some like online communities. So like our wonderful online community, but there are others as well that can be joined.
Yeah, I think yeah, the other part of the question about doctors who don't want to help us, I think that's a whole nother element of the system to bring some light to, because I think doctors have a lot of pressure put on them to do a lot of things. And like a doctor, you think of as seeing a patient, who has a health issue that they need to discuss. There's all this bureaucracy that I can see that happens with doctors as well now, where they have to fill out forms and all of this stuff that like maybe is not part of, I don't know, I've never been to med school, but like probably isn't part of med school. I've been to law school, and honestly they didn't, teach us how to fill out a lot of forms, or that would be part of our job, but it is. So, I think that it's really an issue that doctors more and more have to go through these bureaucratic processes that, again, the government is um, is wanting people to go through that process, but maybe not thinking about how, that whole system is working, and
It's
maybe
not.
there's better, no, but like in terms of like doctors having to fill
Yeah,
out forms and all of that sort of thing, um, how they can better have that system working both for doctors and ultimately for patients and the human beings, at the end of those processes needing to just access support.
absolutely. As I said in our episode on what do you do, like the current system is a deterrent for help, for accessing support and help. And it's just such an inhumane system. So I totally agree with you, Soph.
Mm.
And I think as well, that's sort of what we're trying to do with So You're Disabled, is starting these conversations. But thank you so much for reaching out to us.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We totally understand if none of this was helpful and it's just a shit situation. We hope to bring some awareness to it, though, by talking about it on the podcast, and we really appreciate you reaching out to us. And we hope that there's some support in the comments for you as well. We're thinking of you and we're supporting you as well.
Absolutely. We're sending you so much love.
Okay, and we have our second submission that we wanted to talk about today, and that comes from Lauren. Lauren says, "Hey Tam and Soph, love heart, love your work, and can really resonate with a lot of your experiences. I'd love to open up a dialogue about existing as a disabled person in society and on social media, more specifically touching on the challenges of carving out space for yourself when you don't fall into the tastefully disabled category, which often champions those who are young, thin, white, conventionally attractive, and less financially or economically impacted by their disability. What are your thoughts on this, and is it something you personally feel you've experienced?"
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for this really lovely and so sweet message. It's so nice of you to have said that you love our work. Thank you for that support. And I think this is a fantastic question, something that we've tried touching on in our podcast up to now. And yes, absolutely, Soph and I both feel that we've experienced this.
Yeah, I think that it's, especially in the What Do You Do episode, we started trying to open up a conversation about, well, hang on a second, like, not everyone can girl boss their way through disability and, like,
Who
and
has the energy for that?
oh, truly. And, it's not for everyone to just keep um, doing the grind and trying to make something of themselves in a work context. Like, why are we putting so much pressure on people to work? Like, why are we not thinking about the fact that not everyone can work? Why is it such a taboo if you can't work? Why is it, viewed as this like really intensely bad thing if you can't work? And look at the shame that is internalized when you can't work or when you can't live up to those standards in society, and from Tamara's perspective and her experience, she shared what that's like when you can't work. And from my experience and my perspective, I shared what it's like to have to try and scrape by and work when it's just not always something you feel capable of doing. And so, we've shared both of those experiences. And not only that, we really resonate with this not feeling like you fall into a tastefully disabled category, something that is more palatable, something that doesn't really challenge the narrative, doesn't really challenge the way that we currently perceive society and systems and disability.
I totally agree, Soph. And I think, in particular for me, it's really difficult to carve out space for myself. There is so much representation of disability and so much false representation, even in that, amongst my disability, there are different varying degrees of severity, etc. So then, when you are in a position where you're not doing those same things as people who are perhaps more privileged than you, you're viewed upon so badly, and it's just so damaging to my mental.
Yeah, I mean, I just because I know you're tired today and struggling a little, you said there's like lots of representation for disabled people, but I think what you're meaning is like there's limited representation, but within that there's like maybe a focus on a certain type of way of being disabled.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. And I meant especially, sorry, I've just slept literally for 3 hours. I'm so sorry. And so what I meant as well is that the disability community and its representation has mostly been led by like educated, well-off white people who are exactly as you said before, like girl bossing their way through life sort of thing. So then it makes those of us who can't do that feel really terribly for ourselves. And it just makes it really difficult to focus on my well-being
Mm-hmm.
and my mental health. And so therefore it makes it really difficult to carve out space for myself and find a place where I'm feeling good about myself.
I think, regardless of whether we're talking about work or any of really the categories that Lauren has raised here, what we're talking about is a skewed representation of disability that places unrealistic expectations on all of us about what our experiences are like. And that's why we have this podcast and why we have our community and why we have our Instagram page to highlight that there are different experiences out there, that our lived experience isn't like something you would want to write home about or like not write home about, but like write a movie about where like everything's like this perfect happy ending.
Roses
It's
and
not a
fairies.
Hallmark card. I think that's the like American expression. It's like it's messy and it's complicated and it's not easy. And it's not easy to explain to people who don't have this lived experience. And it fucking sucks
Oh,
sometimes.
so much. And especially for me, the way in which my disability is often represented in advertisements, honestly, it's in such a drastic way. It triggers me so much and like it scares me so much. And so I remember at uni, I had to analyze this ad as part of group work that was actually on my specific disability. But rather than being able to analyze it, I was just fixated on how it represented it in the most terrible, drastic, awful way as a means of like an emotional appeal, right? To get people to donate. But really, like rather than dispelling myths or reducing stigma, all that it was doing was exacerbating that. And so that's all that I could focus on.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into I could have a really good discussion with you about that and go down a rabbit hole, but I want to keep my ADHD brain in check and stay on the point that Lauren has asked us to stay on and say, yes, Lauren, I think there is this real issue of a certain type of way of being disabled that is championed, or way of living with a disability that is championed. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is bring into the light more varied experiences of disability. Not to say that we're like the poster people for, a diverse view of disability. No, not at all. But like diverse enough. And we want to eventually add other voices to our podcast and our Instagram, to highlight even more varied experiences of disability, because it's important, and it's something that really is important to us, that we see ourselves reflected in the media that we consume.
Absolutely. And I think that's another reason as to why it's difficult for me to carve out space for myself, because we're not seeing ourselves represented in the media we're consuming. And that was my point about the ads. Sorry, again, so tired. That's what I meant. I meant it's difficult because it's very misrepresented.
Yeah.
But I really love what you've said, Lauren, about wanting to open up a dialogue. So that's why I think, why don't you also let us know what your thoughts are and we can continue this conversation.
Yeah. And the other thought that comes to my mind is like, I remember in primary school, especially, which is funny because Samara and I went to primary school and she's probably never heard this story before. But like, I remember when people would get awards, in class, or like at the end of the year, there'd be like awards, and I would never get one. And I was like, I want an award. Like, I want to be special. Like, what do I have to do to get an award? And I would like just try my very best. And it felt like, just constantly running into a brick wall, because I was just like, I could never, no matter what I did, get an award, until I had this teacher in year 6 who recognized in me that I was someone special. I just was being measured in the wrong way. And that was massive, because also she was a teacher that everyone was terrified of. And I
I'm
was
still terrified of her.
Yeah, I cried the very first day, like before, when I found out she was going to be my year 6 teacher. I was like crying my eyes out. But she actually ended up being such a big positive influence on my life, because she was one of the only teachers who really believed in my potential. And I think that was ultimately better than any award that I never got
That
in
is so
primary school.
sweet.
Well, because all that I was seeing, now as an adult, I can reflect, all that I was seeing was a certain type of academic excellence being rewarded, a certain type of athleticism being awarded, a certain type of child being awarded.
Yeah.
But not like, there's no award that anyone gives you for like, well done on navigating this very ableist world as a disabled person. Well done on like navigating this world that wants to see you fail, that thinks nothing of you. There's no award for that, but, we do it every day.
Every single day, we're constantly fighting ableism. Speaking of which, though, I think it's so sweet that that happened. And I hated junior school and high school because I was constantly bullied for my weight because I was always overweight.
Oh, I
It's
mean,
just
I can't
terrible.
even like the bullying that went on.
Oh,
I can't even get into. But I think, yeah, it's the same issues that exist because we mostly see white people. We mostly see, um, a certain type of white person as portrayed to us as being attractive in, models and all of that type of stuff. Same goes, I think, with disability. A certain type
yeah.
of disability and way of being disabled is modeled to us, and then that's the only representation we have, and then that's who we look up to.
And then also, that's who like the statistics come out by. So
Yeah.
it's like X amount of people, like disabled people, can work and can do blah and blah.
Yeah.
And then it's like further making it difficult for us to carve out space for ourselves because
Yeah.
it's just being so dominated.
Yeah. It's also like, on social media we see only one side of people's lives. I find that really hard too. Like, because inevitably the human brain sees that and they're like, oh, why am I not doing that? Oh, I'm not able to do that.
Absolutely.
Constantly. And then we're constantly trying to live up to this like unrealistic expectation. Why? Why? Why are we doing that?
So true.
Anyway, we're here and we're real. And this is what it's like. And thank you, Lauren, for the question because it's really good.
Yeah, it was such a good question. And I really meant what I said before. I agree with you, Lauren. We need to be having a dialogue about this.
Yeah.
And I don't think Soph and I touched very much on it being dominated by like thin people. But that is another thing that
Oh,
we wanted to sort of talk about. I'm not too sure how much time we have, though.
I mean, I'll just say this, keep it short and sweet. As a fat person, yes, I totally like the pressure on being healthy and exercising and whatever, and then like having that modeled to me as that's how disability is. No, like this is why health at every size was so revolutionary for me because yeah, like I have gone up and down in my weight over my lifetime, and at the moment I'm on the heavier side of where I've traditionally been, and that's because I got so freaking overwhelmed trying to do everything I'm supposed to do according to society's standards to live. And something had to give, and it was my time for myself, both like to exercise, and being able to prepare food and like eat healthy and all of that sort of stuff. And it's just, I think the inherent privilege of being able to do those things, both having time and also being able to afford it, isn't spoken about enough. And also just that like the pressure put on people by health professionals to eat healthy and exercise and be a certain weight is ridiculous because like you can eat healthy and exercise and still be overweight.
But also, I think, and I totally agree with everything that you've said, but I also think on the other side of that, there are so many issues with being too underweight as well. So for me, as I mentioned, I was always bullied for being overweight and I've always yo-yoed as well with my weight. And right now I'm definitely on the much lighter side that I've ever been in my life. But that's partly because last year, after I lost my dad, I had very frequent, like very close together consecutive episodes that led to me losing so much weight to the point that everyone would look at me and just freak out and be like, oh my God, like, are you okay? You look so sickly. And honestly, that would make me feel really, really badly about myself because I would eat so much to try and give myself energy and to get better and stronger again, but nothing would sort of keep it on. But also, it was really invalidating towards my entire experience of having been unwell since I was 15 because I was actually just as unwell as other times. It's just I didn't look as overtly unwell because I had never been quite so thin. And I think that's also very discriminatory.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to when we're thinking about body positivity and all of those sort of things, keep in mind that it's a spectrum, and like we need to be as body positive for people who are fat and as body positive for people who are skinny. And there shouldn't be a competition. The whole point is body positivity. All bodies are valid, all bodies are good, all bodies, we should love every body.
Absolutely. And take into consideration that there are lots of medications as well that cause weight gain. Like I have been on prednisone, for example, and that makes me put on a lot of weight. And then people are really judgmental of that. And it's just, so I totally agree with you. All bodies need to be loved and appreciated, and we shouldn't be competing against each other as a society, anyways.
No, and I think what we need to see and what we need to talk about is that health doesn't look a certain way. As you said, like we can take medications that make us gain weight as well. And like, I think ultimately at the end of the day, we need to be seeing representation for what disability looks like in different people and being mindful that health is different for like health doesn't have one look, and get this idea out of our minds that in order to be healthy, you have to eat healthy, you have to look healthy, you have to, meaning skinny, you have to go to the gym every day. Like, we need to change the way we think about health. And that starts, I think, with changing the representation for the disability community and having a more varied visibility of different disabilities.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much, Lauren, for this super interesting question. I totally agree with you. We need to be continuing this dialogue. So, send us your thoughts. What do you think about what we've said? Let us know, and we may read it out in our next episode on our submission podcast.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.